name's Martin. I'm one of the guides here at the quarantine station at North Head in Sydney, and I want to tell you about the last pandemic to hit the world back in 1918. That was called Spanish influenza. You may have heard of that before. You're going to find out a lot more about it today. Now, Spanish influenza, just like COVID-19, nobody really knew what it was, and there was no treatment for this. So they were just guessing, trial and error, of which most would have been error. One of those treatments was behind me here in the inhalation chambers. Those poor unfortunate people on the ships were dragged off the ships onto this wharf, and then they were manhandled straight into this chamber where they were locked behind the closed doors and they were gassed with zinc sulfate and hot steam. Doesn't sound very pretty, does it? Let's go inside and find out what it was really like. Hello, now we're inside the inhalation chamber. As you can see, it's a bit dark and mysterious. The doors are locked and bolted so you can't escape. And then we open up a little window up there and this gas comes in and fills up the whole room in a fog. You're forced to breathe, you can't hold your breath, and you breathe for 4 minutes twice a day for 3 days. And the whole purpose of this is not to kill you, but to purify your lungs. Now, what do you think it was like? Well, we have an eyewitness account. This person was in here in 1918, and he wrote the following. He's from the north of England, so I will give you a northern England accent. They found some scheme. They were going to put us through the chamber, sort of gas. Oh, I was up for that, I thought. This'll do me, they ain't going to charge me anything. So they shooed me into this sort of room. I suppose there were 50 or 60 of us in there. And then they sealed it up and turned on this sort of gas. You could hear it squibbing and hissing, and didn't it half get hot and warm and foggy? By gum. I began to sweat a bit, and I suppose it was on for a bit over 5 minutes anyway. I was glad to hear the door opening and let the air in again. Anyway, I came out, and my eyes were running, and I felt, I don't think much of that treatment anyway. Well, anyway, it didn't do me any good. I don't think it did anyone any good. And as for stopping the epidemic, they found out after that it was only egging it on. It was making it worse. If you weren't going to have it, you were more likely to get it having this treatment. So after a while, they knocked it off all of a sudden. So, would you like to come and have treatment with me in the inhalation chambers, or would you prefer to go up to the hospital where we're going next? Well, now we've survived the inhalation chambers, we've walked up to the hospital on top of this hill, and we're going to be put into isolation, and we're going to be kept here in quarantine until we either recover or die. Now, back in 1918, there were 110 ships out there, okay, with 13,000 people. Most of them were returning soldiers from the First World War. And they were kept up there and brought here, and all the hospital beds were overflowing and they had to put them out on the verandas, and it's just like some of the hospitals we see today with COVID-19. There's really nothing you can do when the health service is overrun by patients in desperate need of medication. Now, Spanish influenza is the same kind of virus as COVID-19. You die through pneumonia, through drowning in your own fluids. And of course then, as today, there is no cure and no vaccine. So let's go inside this hospital and see what it would have been like to have been a patient back in 1918. Here we are at the hospital. Let's go inside and find out what happens to you if you're unlucky enough to be a patient. Welcome to the Spanish influenza ward of 1918-1919. This is where the patients were put in these very simple beds. There's not much we can do for you, remember? We just make you comfortable. We put a mosquito net over you, some fresh air, and basically we'll pray for your soul. There's not much else we can do. Now let's find out a bit more about this Spanish influenza. When did it start? You're all probably thinking, it started in Spain, didn't it? Well, you'd be wrong. The reason it's called Spanish influenza is because Spain was the only country not at war in 1918. And as a result, they freely published in their newspapers the outbreak of influenza. Meanwhile, in America and England and the rest of Europe, they had influenza, but they weren't telling anyone. Does that sound familiar today? We think it might have started in the USA on an army base in Kansas when there were 10,000 recruits, and it would have jumped from either pigs or chickens and into the camp and spread like wildfire. Then with troops moving around the whole country, then onto boats, then to Europe, it spread around the whole world. And that's when it became a pandemic. A pandemic means, in Greece, pan is all demic people. That's when it becomes serious, just like COVID-19. Now we know Spanish influenza genetic code is H1N1. Does that ring a bell? It's what happened in 2009. It is swine flu. It's back. Obviously, in those days, it was a lot more virulent. But did you know that it came in 2 waves? The first wave was at the end of 1918. The second wave was 6 months later in 1919. Does that sound familiar? The first wave wasn't as deadly as the second wave. If you'd caught the first wave, you got immunity against the deadly second wave. If you were clever enough not to have caught the first wave and caught the second wave, bad luck. You were most likely to die. So that's what we're watching today, whether COVID-19 has a second wave, whether the virus has mutated and got smarter and deadlier. So just what happened 100 years ago, we hope and pray won't happen today. All right, now we're onto the bed, and we're wondering why on earth would you want to strap your patients to the bed? That's not a very nice thing to do, is it? Well, just like COVID-19, you actually die because you can't breathe anymore. And as your lungs fill up with fluid, you get less oxygen to your brain, and you become delirious, and you start to shake uncontrollably. And we have to tie you to your bed, otherwise you'll fall off and hurt yourself. So that's what these are for. Now, treatments in those days, as I said, were about trial and error. But they knew one thing would work. And when people started to drift into unconsciousness, they would be given an injection. We have an eyewitness account from Alex Dill, a returning soldier, who remembers vividly as he lay on the floor, basically going in and out of consciousness. He remembered an old elderly nurse coming up to him and saying, "Son, I'm going to give you something that's going to make you jump." She stuck a needle into me, and I jumped like I never jumped before, back into life. And I asked her afterwards, what was that she gave me? And she said, that was a shot of strychnine. By golly, it certainly made me jump, he said. So, basically treatments were all different types, just like today. Everybody's guessing. Nobody really knows what's going on. Basically, that's how viruses work. They're very cunning, they're very smart, they're very devious. But hopefully, we will come up with antidotes, with vaccines, that this can prevent it from happening again.